Let's highlight some of the features you're going to need to know where they're located on the Husqvarna Viking Amber Air S400. So as I go into threading it or change it from one needle to another, you'll have an idea of what I'm referring to. So first off, there's times where you need to have the presser foot lifted. It's a good idea to have it lifted when you're threading the machine because these discs are actually open. And if you ever have trouble pulling it through, you can always turn the numbers all the way to 0 and then turn them back when you're ready to go. And if you've ever been told never to touch your tension dials, it's okay because there's a number 3, which is kind of a middle number. Just put them all back to that if any little fingers come to visit. Next on the side, we have a needle threader. This little lever is going to come down. Now, the only thing you have to know about the needle threader is on the side of the machine, there is a mark on the hand wheel and the housing, and they have to line up. So if your needles aren't in the right position, your needle threader isn't going to work. So just make sure you line that up before you bring this down into position. Plus, the presser foot does need to be lowered for a little easier access when threading the needles. There's also a thread cutter back here, which you'll see me use sometimes, but a lot of times I'll bring it around in front of the foot and cut the chain off with that knife going up and down. Last thing on top is the foot pressure. So if you ever need to adjust that for working with any odd fabrics that want to kind of come out a little wavy or start to slip, you can actually adjust the pressure of the foot. On the front, make sure this is always at normal unless you're doing a rolled hem, which is when you can turn it to tight. So tight will tighten up that lower looper, help pull the rolled hem down. Works amazing. But just remember when you're done, make sure it goes back to normal. Okay, so down inside there's a couple levers you do need to have understood where they are and that you do need to know when to use them and when not to use them. So first off, when you're threading the machine, you do need to have the lever down here set for threading. Now when you flip it to the right, nothing happened. But if you wiggle the hand wheel, you'll hear a click. And when you hear a click, that means that the air jet areas the tubes have all closed and the air can push the thread all the way through. When you're ready to go sew, you flip that over to sewing and everything is open and ready to use as a serger. So just remember that the key is that these two once again have to be lined up, and that's what you're actually doing when you give it a turn. You're lining the mark on the hand wheel with the housing. The other thing is right here where the holes are for the upper looper and lower looper threading is that depending on which way this lever is pointing, that's the one it's going to thread. So when you actually go in and push air through it, that's the side that's going to thread. Upper looper here, lower looper there. So just flip it for whichever one you want. Then down here we do have 2 options. This one is really important because this is how you adjust the knife. How wide is it going to cut your fabric off? And I'll get into that of how to really explain that it's not really width of stitch, but how much fabric you're cutting off to get the serged edge to lay flat. So that is to be adjusted based on the thickness of fabric. The last one down here is actually when you push it in, you can actually disengage the knife. So by pushing it in, you saw the knife kind of lower and then push it in and then bring it back up. And I'm going to also talk about that is I'm not a fan of lowering the knife because things can actually move into the area where the loopers are, and if fabric's in there, then things get all tangled up. Not a pretty sight. When you are doing a rolled hem, there's a small lever here. Just make sure that is pulled away from the machine and in when you're actually serging. You can see a little pin changing position. So keep it in when you're working. And last, on the outside of the serger, you actually have 2 knobs in one. The outside knob is your differential feet. So we'll get into how you adjust the settings of the feed dogs to help with those fabrics that are kind of stretchy or slippery. If you're not needing that, just leave it at 1.0. And then the knob on the inside or closest to the housing is your stitch length. And I love that I can change these while I'm stitching and get the exact results without having to move anything. That's just right at my fingertips. So now that you have a little overview, let's get into the next step, which is learning how to thread this fabulous serger.